So I've added cultures into one of the like camembert style cheeses. So I've just put the culture in the same way I did in the big pot. And, you know, I like to kind of mix in a few different directions. The nice thing about this is even though it's going in a circle, it has the ballast, or the baffle, I should say, the baffle to break up that circular motion. But anyway, so then I mix it maybe for about a minute, and then I'm gonna let it sit for 1 hour, and then I'm gonna add, same thing, calcium chloride, rennet goes in last, and then I'll let it sit for about an hour and a half, and then we'll cut the curd and put it into the molds. So I'm working on camembert, or soft cheese, I should say. Some of them are camembert and some are a different version, kind of a very wrinkly cheese. Just like the quark, I added the culture, but in this case I waited 1 hour with the culture in it, and then I added the rennet and the calcium, and then waited an hour and a half. So now I'm at the point where I'm gonna cut it. And so I'm gonna use just like this is my measuring stick. This is the measuring stick for the bulk tank. And I just make some nice cuts. I'm gonna do, they're about, maybe about an inch. And for soft cheeses, if you make 10 gallons of a soft cheese, so this is 7.5 gallons, it's a lot. When you're making hard cheeses, you're gonna do 50 gallons at a time, you know, because that's just hard cheeses. They're big cheeses. But soft cheeses are small quantities. They only last a few weeks, so you don't wanna make too many. And then I'm just gonna leave that. And we're gonna come back to that. Every 15 minutes, I'm gonna give it a little bit of a stir. And now I'm using my other longer measuring thing, and I use it. I probably should have taken the stirring device out, but I'm just gonna cut around it. I'll take it out when I'm done recording. But basically, I'm gonna just do the same thing, just do some cuts. When we're making hard cheeses, I would be using the cutting knives, which are over there. But for this, we're just gonna do this manually, because this is very kind of delicate. You have bigger curds. You don't want tiny, tiny curds. You want these big chunks. So I'm gonna cut. I'm gonna set my timer for 15 minutes, and every 15 minutes, I'm gonna give it a gentle stir. And then once a whole hour has gone by, then I'm gonna hoop it. That means put it into the molds. And that's really it. So these soft cheeses, it's a lot of waiting. So there's, you know, you put your cultures in, and then you go do something for an hour, and you put the rennet in, and then you go do something for an hour and a half. So there's a lot of downtime, and that's why it's nice to be at home, because there's a lot of downtime. You can be working on something else. So I'm gonna finish here. I'm just gonna cut. I'll take these blades out in just a minute, just to move them out of the way. So, and we'll come back to it. So these are draining mats. Pretty cool. You can stack these multiple high. This is what I'll put my molds on, and they drain out this way. So if I push the table and I can get it to drain right over the drain, it just makes cleaning easier. And you have these little pegs, and I like to line up so the one that's closer to this end, if you can see, that one's going to go into this hole right here. You can figure it out, it's not too difficult, but the one that's closer. So I just line it up, put it on, and slide it in. We're going to do a camembert mold. That's our lisseur. And it has two parts, so it has an extension. So the curds settle, so I like to put this extension on, and then as I'm filling it up, I'm gonna fill up probably about almost to the top. And then if it's not right, sometimes milk changes, and next time I might find I have to do more or less, but in general, it tends to be about 3/4 of the way up on this one, more than half. and then you just lock it in. I like to rinse it before I use it, and then we're gonna put our curds in here. We'll let it sit for about a half an hour. We'll use another one of these, put it on top, and then flip it. So. And so 15 minutes has gone by, so now I'm going to come over here, and I'm just going to give these a very gentle stir. So they're ready. And all we're doing is we're releasing the whey. So when you make a cut, you're kind of allowing it to heal, and on that edge that's cut is where the whey will come out. So we don't want to be too crazy rough with it, because it's still healing, meaning that it's still firming up. So we're just going to help it, release the whey. And that one, I did take my paddles out, so those are gone. And I'm just going to break these up a little bit because they've already been cut. So just gentle. You can't really underdo it. I think you can overdo it. So it's better to just sort of underdo it. The next one I might give it a little more of a stir. But the first one I'm going to be pretty careful. Okay, so that's good enough, and we'll give it 15 more minutes. So I'm at, let's see, we cut once, we stirred, and now I'm on a second stir, but you can see the whey starting to separate here. So as we get going along a little bit more, so I'm just going to do another stir. I just keep encouraging the whey to be released. There are certainly different ways of doing camembert. Some people won't cut and they just ladle off the top. And I find, I don't know, for me this seems to work better. I like this technique a little bit better. I'm just encouraging the whey to come off without being too rough. So I'm just about ready to begin hooping the curds for the lasur, or the camembert. And what I like to do, just to move this out of the way, is just pull this rod out, and that will help me to just slide this over. And just be careful of that cord, because you don't want to go too far, but I still can go quite a bit. So there we go, just move it out of the way. I'm going to take this out. And then I'm just going to use one of my basket molds over here. I think this is a good size. And I'll just start scooping. And just pour that right into here. I like to do, just one at a time. If you start doing too many at a time, they may settle and you may be tempted to add more curds. You want to stay with the same one for each fill, so fill it. And I'm just now noticing I got a little bit of leakage coming out of there. Something's not right, so I have to make sure this is completely seated before I keep going. I'm just gonna turn this off for a second. So one of the pegs, this corner one, wasn't totally seated, so I just fixed that. There we go. That's better. I'm going to put a little bit more in. But you can see, look what we talked about for height. That one's a little bit too much. So you can see I filled up all of those. I have, let's see, 7.5 gallons of milk, and that filled up the entire stack that I had of 20. And so I'm gonna go ahead and add another layer. I'm gonna make sure this one is seated well because last time it was not, so I make sure it's totally flat. I have my mold with that extension, and I'm gonna rinse it, and as you notice, nothing will go through. I don't have to worry about the ones on the bottom because this comes out the front, so that's pretty nice. So if you have different cheeses, you wouldn't want one cheese contaminating the one below it, but you get this nice drainage where it comes off. So here's the next one. This is a different culture, and it's called Jolie Po, and it's going to have a very wrinkly texture, but you can see I've stacked it. So when we get ready to flip these, obviously we have to separate them and flip them separately, but I'm going to fill these up. As far as how high, I usually fill these up pretty good, almost to the top. And this is my little system. I use a smaller cup. I use this little guy right here, and I have to lift it a little bit so that I can actually fill it up enough. And then I've also filled these triangular molds. This is called l'escarpe, and I fill them about to that, almost that top line. So the second to the top. So there we go. So 7.5 gallons of milk gave us for, what is that, about 17 of those plus all of these. So our first flip, so I'm using another one of these, like that, and then you're going to take that one and we'll go to that table. Right. And you go to the other side of the table, and I always like to tilt, so he's going to tilt my way just to get rid of some of the way. Otherwise you end up with that on you. Alright, is that good? And then we agree to which way we're going to flip, and we do it quickly. So we're going to go that way. So he puts his hand, I put my hand underneath, we got our hands on top. So we just go 1, 2, 3. Top, yep. And then we kind of look, and it looks like everybody went down. So great, that looks nice. Those work out, and so we're going to go ahead and do those other two. And on these guys, I'm taking off the extension, and if you notice, the cheese is right at the top. That's right where it should be. This is about 45 minutes to an hour later, so this is a good time to flip. So, all right, same deal. And, yep, you're ready for all that whey to come forward. Great. If you wait longer than this, sometimes it sticks, and then when you flip it, they don't really all fall down. So this is ideal. 1, 2, 3. Wait. Good bangers. So these were pretty full, so they're not going to really fall. They look great. Perfect. Same thing, I take off the extension. They're all the way at the top, right where they should be. So that's it. Thank you. Hi, good morning. I'm going to show you what the cheeses look like from yesterday. We did the lesser, the camembert, the camembert style cheese. So they have settled quite a bit. We're going to salt them this morning, but you can see they're pretty low compared to how they were yesterday. This is without the extension. There's no extension here. So they've settled, I would say, almost to about half. And these are the ones that we call Jolie Po. And again, if you look, they've settled to about half of their height. Next time, I might make them a little bit higher. I think I prefer them to be higher. And then this is l'escarpe. So remember, we looked, when we did these, we had them up to that second to top line, and they've settled, I would say, a whole line down. So you can expect that. So these cheeses have a little divot on them. I think you can see it a little bit. So I want to flip them before I salt them, because otherwise they'll have that permanent divot. So Mark's gonna help me. So actually we went ahead and flipped all of these instead of salting them. So flipped lesser and then salted. And the reason why I did that, I want to leave these cheeses in these molds, you know, for the day. I like it if I put the salt on them, leave them in their mold, they hold their shape better. If I took the molds off now, you know, lifted this off, by the end of today they could lose their shape, because sometimes the cow milk, the acidity is different. And if the acidity is different, it just changes how everything behaves. So I've kind of learned, leave the molds on. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm salting them. In a couple hours, I'll flip them. I'll salt them on the other side, and then I'll leave them in the mold till tonight. And then I'll put them on little trays. You're supposed to be weighing your cheeses and doing 1.5% salt based on weight. But I can tell you, for this size cheese, I'm gonna do a 1/4 teaspoon on each side. And then for my smaller ones, those little joli pot, I'm gonna do 1/8 of a teaspoon on each side, so for a total of 1/4. But when you taste your cheeses, if they just taste like they don't have enough salt, add more. I tend to undersalt. I've upped my salting. These guys I will take out of their molds and I'll hand salt them. I'll probably put on an entire cheese like that about 1/4 of a teaspoon, maybe a little bit more. It's not an exact science, but I'll get salt on every surface. So here's how I do these. I generally will sprinkle a little bit on top, you know, maybe a 1/16, 1/8 of a teaspoon. And I should have done that earlier. I should have done all of them. Just do all of them on the tops early and then come back to it later. And then I'll just take, you know, this is probably about maybe 1/8 of a teaspoon right there. But I'm going to do a little bit more. A little bit more. And then back into the mold so we keep the shape. If I left this cheese out, it would just start to sag and it would lose its shape. So I'm going to put it back in, and it's going to stay in this mold probably until tonight, possibly until tomorrow morning. I'll check it. You can tell when they're ready. They kind of firm. The salt causes them to firm up. So it's been probably about 5 hours since I salted the cheeses this morning. And now I'm going to go ahead and put them on their tray and their plastic mat. So they're plastic mats. The plastic mats are really important because they are going to allow the cheeses, that bloomy rind, to grow. It needs a little bit of oxygen, so the mat just lifts it up just enough. So I'm going to take my trays off, and you remember the basic mold. I'm going to just lift that off. I think 5 or 6 hours after salting is plenty of time. If the next day, if I notice that these kind of lost their shape, I would then say, no, I need to leave them in that mold longer. Maybe like, I don't know, maybe till tonight or something. But I am going to take my chances because I really want to get them finished and get them salted and put so that they can sit overnight. So I finished the taking everything out of the molds. These are those escape, the triangular ones. So they are pretty good. They got salted this morning. They got salted all over. And in terms of firmness, they feel good. And I'm going to go ahead and also put these in the walk-in cooler just so they don't sag. I think they'll be fine. And we'll check on them tomorrow. I like to put the molds over here in some soapy water, and then I just give them a little, kind of a quick squish, and then I bring them in the house. I put them in the dishwasher. They do very well in the dishwasher. So these are the camemberts. I salted them earlier, and they've been on these trays after complete salting. So I did the salt in the morning, 4 or 5 hours later, flipped, did another salt. They stayed in their molds for about 4 or 5 hours, and then on that second salting where I salt the other side, I take them out. Then I put them on their tray, but you can see there's quite a bit of whey starting to build up. So I'm gonna take these out and I'm just gonna tip the tray and get rid of the whey. I might use a rag, a clean one obviously, and kind of sop up what's in the corner. And I may do this again, I'll check it again in a couple of hours, so 1 to 2 times during the night. This tray, it had some whey and I tipped it into the sink, just like I did last time. And I feel, I don't know, these are borderline. I feel like there's too much, they're dripping. They've got a little bit too much water still on them, so I'm gonna do a clean tray. I'm gonna go ahead and flip them and move them over to a clean tray because I think they are just a little too wet. I don't mind the first couple days, but where we are now, I'd really like to get them a little bit drier so that they don't grow the wrong kind of mold. So we're just gonna get them on dry mats. So I didn't have quite enough room on this tray to put the camemberts and these smaller ones. So these smaller ones, I put a culture in that's gonna make them wrinkly but not fuzzy white. The camembert style is gonna be the classic fuzzy white. Those need to be on a mat. So you have to be sure fuzzy white stuff stays on a mat. These guys can be out at the edge where there's no mat because it won't matter. The other critical thing is they shouldn't really touch. So you should have just a little bit of space in between everybody because as they start growing molds, they will stick together, and when you pull them apart, they'll break. It'll break the skin off. So I've decided, I decided to move from here, which is 70, well, it's actually 80 degrees in here because I have hot water and everything. But I'm gonna move them into this room. It's 51, 99% humidity, so I like that. I think they will hold their shape better by being a little cooler. It's almost like they're melting. Maybe the milk has changed. So when the milk changes and you sense that something's different, you know, you can maybe change your recipe a little bit or just try something different. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna keep them in here. And normally I would zip this up, but I think tonight I'm gonna just leave this unzipped and let them dry out a little bit. And I'll check them in the morning. And those will start to get a bloomy white covering in about 10 days. So one thing I want to show you is the humidity in here. You know, I really love these towers. Keep them zipped. If you need them to dry out a little more, like if you have cheeses that you want, then you can leave it open and, you know, just manage it that way. But for the most part, I keep them zipped. Really pay attention to mold. Pay attention to mold. You may have to at some point just clean that. I like to do in the summer, give it a nice wipe down, a little bit of bleach, and let it stay out in the sun. For some of these other small areas that I might see pop up, I like to just wipe everything down on the inside with a damp rag that has a little bit of bleach on it. But I also wanted to talk about humidity. And here, 98% is great. Anything below 90% is too low if you have cheese. Temperature in here has been quite low. I'm gonna hit the button, and I think the temperature has really been around 46. Not too bad. We're not using any supplemental heat in the winter, which is pretty cool, just using the air conditioner. If you had to add a little bit of heat, which we didn't all winter, got just a natural refrigerator. I think part of it is because we have an uninsulated wall here, so some of the heat from this room goes into that room. That's a real benefit. The water that's in the drain over there goes into that room, so you get that constant humidity. If you're not working in here for a few days, you should either hose down this floor or hose down the other floor to keep that humidity up. But it's ended up being a very good system. If you need to add heat, they have a thing called InkBot, and we use the CoolBot. The CoolBot's kind of expensive, $300-400. That's what we have in the downstairs cheese cave, and that's what we have out there, and it tricks the air conditioner to cool. But if you needed to heat, you might have to get like a little space heater and a thing called an InkBot, and I think it's like $15-20, and it will just tell the heater when to go on and off, and you can set different temperatures. But that's a great way to manage that room. Here's the cheese that we did probably about 4 to 5 days ago. I have not flipped them. They got a little bit neglected because it was a weekend. We had family over, but I knew it was probably okay. Once they start really getting some changes on them, though, I need to be a little more diligent. So I'm just going to flip these. They have a little bit of way under them. I might consider moving them to a drier mat, but I don't mind. They're actually pretty good. I think these look good. These guys, I'm just gonna pull them so that they're not stuck, but I'm not really gonna flip them yet. I'm just gonna pull everybody off, because once they start growing, you know, with their molds, they can get stuck to the mat, and then it's gonna tear off the curd and tear off any of the mold that has started to grow. So just make sure they're really loosened. Good. If it happens that it tears off the mold, it's not the end of the world. You can still sell those. They just don't look as pretty on the bottom. But as long as nobody looks at the bottom, who cares? It's okay. So here's the Joli Pot, and we are at about 12 days. Not bad. I could potentially wrap this and put this in the shop for sale, but it's only Monday, so I want to let this age a little bit more. The room is at about 91% humidity. I might up that humidity, but these guys are starting to feel soft. They feel good. Here are the scarpe. You know, they're just now starting to get, but it's really nice if you make these soft cheeses right out of the gate. Even though sometimes they're challenging, it will give you cheeses to sell right away. So you always have something you can put on the shelf. These are out only 12 days. The other thing is, so this is a great cheese now, or maybe another week, but in 3 weeks, it's still a really great cheese. It has probably about a 5-week shelf life. I put 3 weeks. Once I package it, I put 3 weeks on it. But it's really, really good. Probably for 5 weeks, but keep testing them. Here's a defect. It's called a skin slip, and you can see where the skin is separating, you know, from the rest of the cheese. This happened a lot to me in the beginning, and I realized I just wasn't drying out my cheeses well enough. But at this point, I think it's the milk. I'm noticing with this new change in the milk, like I've had difficulty with my blue cheese, and you know, just little subtle changes, nothing major, but I'm noticing I'm getting a tiny bit of skin slip because I think the curd is weaker. The pH is different in the milk, and so the cheese is behaving a little differently. It doesn't really matter. I mean, even fancy cheeses, I've seen them have skin slip on their cheeses, so it's like, well, it happens. And you have to just be flexible with the milk. Sometimes you will have to abandon what you're doing, pick a different recipe, but for the most part, just a little bit of imperfection, just notice it, maybe dry out a little bit better if you can, you know, but for the most part, I'd rather have them too wet than too dry. If they get too dry, you start to get around the edges some dryness. These look pretty good. I saw a couple that I thought were borderline, and that's why I said I think I really need to increase the humidity in that room, because just around their outer edge, they looked a tiny bit dry. I believe in the video the other day, I may have shown you mucor, which is a gray mold. It's here. And it was really obvious before. I tried to like rub it in a little, and it didn't really go away. But the penicillium is starting to take over. So I'm not going to really worry about it. It looks like the penicillium is going to win. When we wrap our cheeses in their cheese paper, they will continue to age. So they will continue to grow the penicillium. These guys are almost completely covered. Again, skin slip around the edge of some of these, but not the end of the world. You know, once they're packaged, I think that helps pull the skin closer to the cheese, and so it's not such an issue. But again, I just think this is a pH change in the milk, and I'm not going to do too much different. And you can see where I accidentally got some sticking on the mat, but not a problem. But this is what they look like on this side. You can see a little bit of bald spot, but that will fill in. I'm gonna go ahead and lift it and turn it so it looks great. I'm looking for any contamination, any gray. I don't see anything, so everything looks good. I don't like to see that much white on these. Next time I may add less of the penicillium. You have to be careful, don't go too low on the culture because then you get some contaminant molds, but you don't want the white competing with the wrinkle. You want the wrinkle, so you really have to hold back on the penicillium. That's the white part. The geotrichum is the wrinkly part, but everybody's looking pretty good, so we're gonna probably wrap these in the next few days.